They built cities before the Inca, not small villages, not scattered tribes, but organized worlds. They shaped rivers, controlled climates, fed thousands, sometimes millions, and then they vanished. Not conquered, not remembered, not even recorded. When the Inca rose to power, they did not begin a civilization. They stood on top of one, or many. And here is the real mystery. How does an entire world, a system, a civilization, simply disappear? Not destroyed, but forgotten. Long before the Inca Empire, South America was already full of power. Not one empire, not one origin, but layers. Civilizations built on top of older civilizations. Each one rising, each one falling, each one leaving behind something. But not enough. Across deserts near the Pacific coast, deep inside the Amazon basin, high in the Andes Mountains, people were not just surviving. They were organizing. They were planning. They were engineering. They created systems, not just settlements. And these systems were not simple. They controlled water in regions where rain was rare. They farmed in climates where crops should not grow. They built networks that connected distant communities. But there is one thing they did not leave behind: a written memory. And without writing, history becomes fragile. Let's begin with Caral, a city built over 4,000 years ago, older than the pyramids of Egypt, older than most civilizations we learn about in school. And yet, almost no one knows its name. Caral was not a chaotic settlement. It was planned, structured, organized around large public spaces, pyramidal platforms and ceremonial centers. But here's what makes Caral truly strange. There is almost no evidence of war, no weapons, no fortifications, no signs of violent conflict. Instead, there was coordination. People worked together, built together, maintained a system that did not rely on fear. So how did they do it? Some researchers believe they controlled something more powerful than force. They controlled resources, food, trade, access. And when you control what people depend on, you don't need to control them directly. Caral was not just a city, it was a system. And for centuries, it worked. Until it didn't. And when it collapsed, it left almost no explanation behind. High in the Andes, at an altitude where breathing itself becomes difficult, another civilization rose. Tiwanaku, a place where survival should have been limited, but instead, it became powerful. Because Tiwanaku did something extraordinary. It mastered the environment. They created raised fields, elevated agricultural platforms surrounded by water. This system protected crops from frost, regulated temperature, stored heat during the day, released it at night. In a place where farming should fail, they made it thrive. They turned harsh land into a controlled system, and that system fed thousands, possibly tens of thousands. This was not primitive. This was engineered, carefully, precisely, sustainably. But like Caral, Tiwanaku did not leave written explanations. No manuals, no records, only structures. And when those structures were abandoned, the knowledge began to fade. Then came Wari, an empire before the Inca, not just a culture, but a system of control. Wari built roads, connected regions, organized production, established administrative centers. They understood something critical. Power is not just about territory, it is about coordination, the ability to move resources, to distribute labor, to maintain order across distance. Wari did not need to be visible everywhere. They needed to be present in the system, in the roads, in the supply lines, in the expectations of how people lived. And this is where something important happens, because when a system becomes part of daily life, people stop seeing it. It becomes normal, invisible, until it collapses. And when Wari fell, what remained was not memory, but fragments. When the Inca rose, they did not invent civilization. They inherited it. They built on top of systems already tested. Road networks, expanded, tracing, refined, state organization, strengthened. They did not start from zero. They started from advantage, from accumulated knowledge, from centuries of experimentation, by people we barely remember. But here is the turning point. The Inca unified what was once separate. They created scale, consistency, central control, and because of that, they became visible, recognizable, memorable. But in doing so, they also replaced what came before. Older identities disappeared, older systems were absorbed, older histories faded. We often assume that history is permanent, that once something happens, it cannot be lost. But that is not true. Without writing, memory depends on people, on stories, on repetition. And when systems change, stories change. When empires fall, traditions break. When populations move, memory fragments. Over generations, details disappear, names are forgotten, meanings shift, structures remain, but their purpose is lost. A road becomes just a road, a terrace becomes just a hill, a city becomes ruins. And without explanation, ruins do not tell stories. They create questions. And if no one answers those questions, they become silence. Then came the final break, the Spanish conquest. When Europeans arrived, they encountered the Inca, a powerful, organized empire, visible, structured, understandable. So they wrote about it, they recorded it, they defined it as the beginning. But everything before, they could not see it, could not understand it, and so they ignored it or destroyed it. Temples were dismantled, sacred spaces erased, oral traditions interrupted, and in their place, a new history was written, one that began with what was visible and ended with conquest. Everything older was pushed into the background, not just lost, but overwritten. So why do we remember the Inca, but not those before them? Because history is not about what came first. It is about what survives long enough to be recorded. The Inca existed at the moment of contact. They were documented, described, analyzed, and so they entered global memory. Caral did not. Tiwanaku did not. Wari did not because they were less important, but because they were earlier, and earlier means more vulnerable to being forgotten. The Inca were not the first. They were simply the last to be seen. This is the pattern we rarely acknowledge. Civilizations do not appear suddenly. They accumulate, layer by layer, system by system, each one learning from the last, each one inheriting something, even if they do not remember where it came from. The Inca were not an origin. They were a culmination, a final expression of knowledge built over thousands of years. Knowledge that is now fragmented, scattered, partially understood. And maybe this is the most unsettling truth. History is not what happened. It is what survived, what was recorded, what was preserved, and what was allowed to be remembered. Everything else is silence. But silence does not mean absence. It means we have forgotten how to read the land. Because sometimes the past is not written in books. It is carved into mountains, hidden in valleys, embedded in the way people still live today. And there is one place where that memory still lingers. In the far north of Vietnam, there is a plateau of stone, harsh, beautiful, unforgiving. But for centuries, people have lived there, adapted to it, built systems that outsiders rarely understand. NVN, a land where survival itself became a system, where culture, tradition, and environment are still connected in ways the modern world has almost forgotten. And the question is this just a remote place, or is it something more? A living echo of how civilizations once survived against impossible conditions. In the next series, we leave South America and travel to Vietnam to uncover a different kind of civilization, not lost, but overlooked. Ng Vien, the Stone Plateau Civilization.